Chris and Shane observe with a 5-inch refractor on episode 374 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We're amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for everybody who likes going out under the stars. So maybe before we get going on our observations, Shane, we can talk about giving away. I got a few of these RASC observers calendars we can give away to Patreon supporters.
Yeah. So we gave a few calendars away last year, and I can't remember, but it was some sort of competition that we ran. This year, no competition, just similar to, was it the Alistair telescope giveaway? Anyway, It doesn't really matter. Basically, if you're a Patreon supporter, we will put your name in for a draw, which will happen on December 10th. And we'll announce the winners, and it'll just be a random number generator picking the winners.
Yeah, it's just the simplest way for us to do it. We do the podcast just for fun, and in the past we've run like competitions, and that it takes up a lot more time and than we have, unfortunately. So this is easy because we have the details for the Patreon supporters already. And we do appreciate the Patreon support. It helps keep the show going, for sure, eh, Shane?
Yeah. And truth be told, we do really appreciate the Patreon supporters, but throughout the year, I think one of our lessons learned or observations is that we, in the past, maybe didn't thank them enough. So this is just a way to thank the Patreon supporters.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I think the original idea is that we would do this podcast during the pandemic, especially like during the lockdowns, because it seemed like we were heading towards a lockdown. And then we did get a lockdown like 3 weeks after you or 2 weeks after you and I had chatted in person. And so we started the podcast at that time in March of 2020. And then, the plan was, hey, we'll do this for 3 or 4 months. And then, of course, the pandemic really dragged on for a couple of years. But for the most part, it kind of feels like it's at least in the very final stages, but we've continued on, Shane, it seems, somehow.
Yeah, we haven't ran out of content or topics, so I guess we keep going.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm running into now, oddly enough, the biggest challenge for me anyhow is the fact that, and you were sort of alluding to this when we were chatting just before, is that I will stay up quite a bit at night doing astronomy, and then I'm often not at my most sharp intellect. I'm not as sharp intellectually in the morning when I've been up at night. I was up last night at 3:00 in the morning doing a little, as I was telling you. So that's the thing that I find a little bit challenging, but it's all good. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun doing what has been what are some of the takeaways for you, Shane, for doing the podcast? Now we've been doing it for, I guess, 3 2/3 years or something like that.
Yeah, takeaways. I don't know, that there's just a lot of interest in visual observing. Obviously you and I are interested in it, but the amount of listeners and the amount of emails we get, there's a lot of passion for this that's out there. And it's just been great to connect with people. And the other thing that I think stands out is just the varied observing programs, or interests maybe is a better word, of our listeners, which I think is a representation of the whole community. But I remember you and we've talked about this a few times, but when we first started talking about some asteroids that people could observe, we thought, I don't know if this is going to be all that popular.
Why did we do an episode on this?
yeah, and all of a sudden it was like, holy cow, there's a lot of people that are observing these things and are super interested. So I love that variance, and it's actually opened up my observing to more objects, even like variable stars. I don't do them a lot still, but I certainly have gained a greater interest in those, and carbon stars, and having the various guests on that are, I don't know if experts is quite the right word. In some cases it is for sure, but people that just have a passion for observing some of these categories of objects has been great. And then, listener observing reports is, kind of motivation to look at some of that stuff too.
Yeah. No, for sure.
How about you? What's your biggest takeaway?
Well, my biggest takeaway is, just to keep things simple. I think you've really been good at it, enforcing that rule. That's our rule. We have one rule: keep it simple. I think is probably the number one rule, if I'm not mistaken.
The KISS principle.
Yeah, exactly. Not to overly complicate things with an acronym, but yes, keep it simple. Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing is that I've been really surprised at how many people do write in. That's really quite amazing, and we appreciate that quite a bit. It's very cool.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Because when you do this, I know when we were doing it, when we had our first podcast, we did whatever it was, 12 or 13 episodes, and we never heard from anybody. And it just felt really almost claustrophobic, like we were just sort of sitting in a closed cell and then making these and then putting them out. And it's hard to say. Like, I think people were listening to them, but when you don't get that feedback and you don't have that interaction, I didn't enjoy that. Really, I didn't enjoy it at all, and so we stopped doing it. And you had some feedback as well. And then so when we did this again, I think we did it in such a way that it's helped to prompt more conversation with whoever is listening. And it's really amazing. Like you and I were hanging out on Saturday night, and we were talking about the fact that it kind of comes ebbs and flows. I mean, there's some weeks where we're getting emails every day, which is awesome. And then there's some weeks where we might get, half a dozen or so emails, but sort of in the grand scheme of things, it seems like a large number of the listeners have written in and provided their feedback, and more recently show ideas. We're in a bit of a run. I think we've received 6 or 8 show ideas recently. If people have show ideas, they can send those in as well. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, which actually helps quite a bit too, because we do run into some funks occasionally where we're thinking, what should we talk about this week?
Talk about this week? Yeah, somebody wrote in. We were going to do it today, but I want to spend a little bit more time on this one, bounce some things back and forth. Is the LDAS versus equatorial? Yeah, somebody had that as an idea, and actually, there's quite a few, and then I think we'll just organize those and try to do them before Christmas-ish, something like that. And yeah, should be good.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to give away a calendar. What do you think? Actually, I think we'll do 3 calendars, Patreon supporters. So if you'd like to be entered into the Patreon supporter draw, please be a Patreon member. I think we'll do the draw. What do you think? December 10th? That'll give people a month.
Yep, that sounds good.
Yeah. And we'd appreciate that. And then, that should be fun. So here's a loaded question. Did you get any observing in this week, Shane?
Maybe. Yes, I was at your cottage Friday night. Friday night. Yeah. And
we had Friday off, folks, so it seemed like it was a Saturday.
It did. Yeah, I'm all out of whack here, but yeah, it was a nice session. It was just great to be under the stars. And how about you? I know you were there that night, but did you get anything else in?
Yeah, I did end up doing that session with you. You left. I warmed up. I did another session. Mm-hmm. I came in around midnight, went to bed for a few hours, and then got up in the middle, like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and did another session for an hour, and then went to bed. And then last night, it was really warm last night. It was like 3 degrees and cloudy. And then, but I woke up at 3 o'clock and went out for like 15 or 20 minutes with the binoculars. But it was Friday night was pretty cold and windy, eh?
Yeah. For sure, the wind was an issue. The temperature wasn't terrible. What was it? Base temperature was around -4, and then a little colder with the wind.
-12 with the wind, they said.
Yeah. I think my biggest issue is I'm just not acclimated quite yet to the cold temperatures. In January, last night would have been like a balmy observing session. We might not even have worn jackets because we'd be so used to cold temperatures. Exactly. But this time of the year, I'm still kind of in that transition mode.
Yeah, I think
hands and feet got a little chilly.
Yeah, I was fine. It's just the wind I find in fact, I was totally fine when you and I were observing. And then I did the other, another hour and a half or so after you left. And then I was fine. But when I got up in the morning and went out, it was a little windier and I think just a hair colder or something, although it still said it was -4. But it felt like fantastically cold. Like I went out and I would observe for 15 minutes and then come in for 2 or 3 minutes and then go out for 15 minutes and come in for 2 or 3 minutes. I just, yeah, it felt a lot colder for some reason in the morning. Although I think, and I realized this the next day is when you and I were observing, we're kind of like, up and down and taking a look and having a chat and, got to get this out of my car because, we had a few things to hand off. And then, we're kind of moving around a bit more. And I think when I'm just observing by myself, I go out and just plunk down at the telescope and we're just sitting there, not moving for a long period of time, and you just get colder faster, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Let's see. What did we look at? What stuck out to you for the stuff that we looked at? We have my 5-inch telescope set up. You brought a telescope, but I already have my 5-inch set up, and it wasn't amazing conditions with the wind. So I think it was a good decision just to share some views. It was kind of fun.
Yeah. I brought my little 63, I think it is, or is it 64? Can't remember.
The telemeter?
The telemeter, yeah. It's one
63, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So I brought that, but left it in the vehicle. Part of it was just the conditions weren't phenomenal. It was a good night, just not a great night. But also I was pretty tired. I didn't have a lot of energy, so that kind of got in the way a little bit too. But yeah, really enjoyed the views through your 5-inch. And what stood out? I don't know. The Helix Nebula was incredible. I really enjoyed those views. It's kind of neat to have a quick look at M13, the Ring. Even Saturn, the seeing wasn't great at all, but it was fun to have a quick look at that and pull out some of the moons. That's probably the standouts for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, just like when we were looking at M13, I was so I kind of hunted it up with 18 power and the 40 millimeter, and then I put the 17 millimeter 92 degree eyepiece in, which gives us about 45 power, and I was just really curious what you would think about that 17 millimeter eyepiece. I know you're a bit of an eyepiece aficionado, even a little bit more than me, and I was always curious to see what you would think of that eyepiece as we were messing around in a session.
Yeah, I was quite impressed with it. One of the comments that I mentioned to you that night is that 92 degrees seems just right. When I've looked through 100-degree eyepieces in the past, which really are just the Ethos from Teleview, I didn't love the views through those because I felt like I had to move my eyeball all around to take in the entire field of view. And I just thought, what's the point? I thought it was just too much. And looking through your 17 millimeter Explore Scientific, certainly, the 92 degrees, you still have to pan your eye around a little bit, but it didn't seem strenuous. It was a really nice view. It's quite sharp. Light throughput, I thought, was quite good. The only complaint I have, and I think this is more of a me problem with how I'm built physically, is that I was having some blackout issues. Like if I got too close, and this is wearing my glasses even, it almost had too much eye relief for me. So like if I got too close to the eye guard, I was having some pretty serious blackouts. But if I just backed my eye or my head position back just a couple of millimeters, then I was okay, and I wasn't having those blackout issues. And with an eyepiece like that, with a huge field of view, it makes that hovering style of observing a lot easier. Because one of the downsides to that hovering style is sometimes, you're not able to hold, at least I'm not able to hold my eye perfectly center, in place to see whatever I'm looking at. And with a narrower field of view, that becomes an issue because all of a sudden you're not seeing anything.
Yeah.
But with this 92 degrees, you can sort of sway a little bit and not miss anything. So overall, I was quite impressed with it. Certainly also acknowledged the balance issues that it caused. It could also serve as ballast in a shipping vessel. But yeah, nice eyepiece. Very nice.
Yeah, I haven't noticed. For me, it doesn't black out. I've never really seen it black out. For me, the number one characteristic, which I enjoy so much, is that when I do put it in, I can just be sitting and observing and sketching. and going back and forth between the sketchbook and the field lens is just so, or the eyepiece lens that you look through is so easy that like you don't spend a lot of time sort of reacquiring the image or anything like that. So I like how easy it is to kind of, the eye positioning is not critical on it. You can, as you kind of bring your eye towards it, you can see like that field of view. It's just sitting there, like a photograph or a painting, instead of like some eyepieces. You'll notice they kind of pour in, or like you said, you can get like this flicker from the blackout or whatever. But I can't remember what it was like the first night I used it. Maybe there was a bit of a learning curve. I don't know. The other thing was we were standing, which I usually don't do when I'm using that eyepiece. Usually we're seated, so it could just be first time eyepiece learning.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. Sometimes there is a little bit of a learning curve, to just get used to an eyepiece, and also you're right, man. Sitting would make a huge difference too, for sure.
Yeah, I have thought, and I think what I might do eventually is try to. This will be a next year project, is to figure out or build a counterweight system for using that eyepiece, because I have set it up to scan, because with 45 degrees, it's actually just under 45 degrees in the 750 millimeter focal length f5 apochromat. It's still 2 degrees. You get 2 degree field, which is large enough that if you're looking at nearby targets or like the veil or something, you don't want to be switching the eyepiece in and out, and it's fun to pan around with it. But the way it is such a huge weight difference between that eyepiece and anything else I own, you're not as inclined. Like you kind of have to cradle the bottom of the telescope and pan around. It's pretty awkward.
Yeah, for sure.
That's my only complaint with it. You asked if I would be interested in getting the 12. I already own the 12.5 millimeter Doctor eyepiece. I gotta say, if I was making a fresh start of things, and I realize these are not inexpensive eyepieces, but keep in mind, I did buy this one when it was on sale for 60% off, so it wasn't that expensive. And I think if I was doing this again, I would wait out the sales. And if I was building a kit after, I think you need to observe a fair bit before you get into these kind of expensive eyepieces. I just don't think it's worthwhile until you've had your Plossls and your more inexpensive wide fields and that sort of thing. I think this is sort of a final eyepiece in these sort of sizes. But I think that a nice set might be something like the TeleVue 31, the 17, the 12, and then something like the Explore 9 millimeter 120 for a telescope range. I think that for your sort of wide field, low to mid powers, I think you'd be there. I think that would be the set, pretty much ideal. Knowing even that the 9 millimeter is an eyepiece you can't really use with eyeglasses. I think even with eyeglasses on, you'd get much of it in, and that's an eyepiece that I would really like to try at some point. But those are big, massive, heavy eyepieces, all of them. But I think you would be pretty close to in balance with the 31 and the other ones that you could probably figure out a range. And it would be a heavy little eyepiece case, 4 eyepieces and that much weight. But I think it would be. I think it would be pretty cool. And then what you could do is get something like the Antares 1.6x Barlow. And I don't know what that would look like with all those, but I think that would give you a little bit of variance in the power, at least with the 9 millimeter, or maybe a 2x Barlow of some sort, or a 2.5x Barlow of some sort with the 12 to get sort of those higher powers. Because we did use some higher power as well. The thing that stuck out most for me that evening, and I'll tell you, the hallmark of really good optics, for anybody who hasn't looked through really good optics and wonders why the heck would you spend more than $50 on an eyepiece, especially a really simple eyepiece like the one I'm going to talk about, is is how much the image sticks with you. Like you said, Shane, we didn't have the best conditions. It was pretty windy. It was relatively unstable, but we put an eyepiece of yours into a Barlow of mine, and it was like the Reese's peanut butter cups of eyepieces. What was that eyepiece?
Yeah, I brought out a collection of kind of weird, unique eyepieces, and the one that we played around with a little bit on Saturn was the Zeiss Abbey Ortho 16 millimeter, and that's from the first generation or the first series. There's two series of the Zeiss Abbey Orthos, with I think the same focal lengths between both series, just some slight differences. Like I think series one was, it's like 44 degree field of view, and series 2 is like 41 or 42.
Okay.
Because some people complain slightly with the series 1 that like just on the very outer edge stars weren't quite sharp, so they just narrowed the
They just made
field
it smaller.
yeah, so a couple little differences like that. And maybe, I don't know, I think there's the second gen might all be parafocal, but anyway,
Okay.
doesn't matter about those details. We started out with the 16 millimeter just natively looking at Saturn, and it was quite nice. And then you grabbed a 3.2 Barlow. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the Teleview, but it works as a 3.2. It's a 3x, but it works as a 3.2. And that gave us a 5 millimeter for 150 power.
Yeah. And I was quite surprised actually with the view. Again, I don't even know if I'd give it a 3 out of 5 that night.
No.
It was not good, but it wasn't the worst I've seen.
No.
But it was quite easy to get 3 moons. And there was a fourth one that would kind of come in and out.
Mm-hmm.
And even some of the banding on Saturn I was able to get. I wasn't able to see the Cassini division. I'm not sure if you were able to get that, but
we were standing, right? So we didn't.
It's hard to pull that out.
Yeah. So just sort of for context, we were on my deck, which usually is a little bit. I had it reinforced. My builder reinforced it so I could set up telescopes on it, and it works really well for that. But usually with two people, there's a small bit of vibration, and usually we sit when we're doing like 150 power or more. But there was a lot of snow on my deck, which really worked to stabilize the telescope in the wind. But because I think we were standing, it kind of impacted things. Usually we would have sat if I had that set up that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Though, another thing that really jumped out at me is your Takahashi Lapidus mount. It's a simple alt-az mount, super stable, but I really, really enjoyed the slow motion controls. That was just fantastic, especially at those higher powers. It was really nice to be able to just dial or turn the knob to keep tracking Saturn. And then for some of the other fainter objects that we were looking at, it was kind of nice to be able to go back and forth on the slow-mo controls, just to get some movement in the scope to tease out some of these fainter objects.
Yeah, that mount and the way I have it set up is I spent a long time thinking about what would be the best alt-az mount, and I tracked this one down when I lived in Ontario, because I'm not sure if they still make it, but to describe the mount it's about maybe 10 inches tall, and it's kind of about as round as like a pop or a soda can kind of thing. Is that sort of a good way to describe it?
Yeah, it's quite tall, taller than it is round, that's for sure. And it's about as basic as it can get. And I think instead of overhanging kind of on the outside of the tripod, it places the telescope right in the middle of the tripod, which is a genius design. Like I'm a big fan of the Stellarvue M2C mount. That's what I use all of the time. That's what I even brought out to your place on Friday night. But the Stellarvue hangs it kind of on the outside of the tripod, so you're already now losing, I think, just a touch of stability. But when you can have it right over the center there, it's better. And maybe where you get limited is if you're trying to look like at zenith.
Zenith, yeah,
you're probably going to bang into the mount with the TAC one, whereas the Stellarvue, you'd be able to do that, but I'm not usually observing at zenith because that's a real pain.
Yeah. And you can get up to like 75 or so degrees up before you start running into the tripod. In fact, if you had it set up a little different, you can sort of work around it a little bit better. But just the way that we have it set up, it actually sits inside a hub by about an inch. So if it wasn't in that, then you'd gain an extra inch. And because of that, you would also, be able to point another maybe 4 or 5 degrees higher up. But yeah, I mean, how often are you looking 80 or so degrees or higher into the sky? Just not that often. So it's a small price to pay. But I don't know if they still make it.
They do not. If they did,
don't.
I would own one because I love that mount so much.
It was really expensive. I think it was around 600 or 700 US or something like that. I can't remember. Maybe it was Canadian. So this is about 20 years ago. Not quite. About 17 years ago. And I had wanted one. They stopped production, and a guy was selling one it was in mint working condition, but it wasn't in mint aesthetic condition. So it had some some dings and scrapes, and it had been well used, which is always a good sign when it comes to a mount. You see a lot of gear that's being sold that's in pristine condition, which you can get excited about, and then you might wonder, well, why is that? Like, is this just not a good piece of equipment? But that piece of equipment is really good. This person sold it to me. So the original design, I don't know if you know this, Shane, was that the Lapidus had a bit of an arm to it, and the telescope would sit in the arm. There was another mount. It was an Astrotech something or other. And just talking off the top of my head, it was put out by a number of different companies, and you could actually angle that arm even down 45 degrees to clear the tripod or whatever. That's what the Lapidus originally had. And then a person bought one, took the arm out, and then kind of refinangled it. And then when people were buying them and making this modification to increase the stability and carrying capacity, because I think the original carrying capacity was scarcely 12 pounds, and it would hold up to about 12 pounds very well. They turned it into a mount that could hold 16 pounds exceptionally well. And because of that, it of course became an attractive mount for those of us with up to 5-inch class apochromats, and that was the audience for this mount. Of course, a very small audience. They unfortunately found out, and then it went out of production. So I picked this up. This guy sent it to me. He was only living the town over. I can't remember if I met him or if he mailed it over. It was very inexpensive because of the cosmetic condition. And I received it. It had these plastic knobs. That's how it came. The plastic knobs were fine, but I replaced those with these long aluminum knobs, as you've seen. And I had them. What I did is I used the mount and I measured based on my telescope how far back those knobs would be, and I had those custom machined and made for that mount to be a certain distance, so that when you're looking through the eyepiece, you can rest your hand. It makes a nice hand rest, and then you can kind of just sort of move your wrist, and just a very comfortable motion to track targets at high power. So that's the setup of that mount. It's really quite nice for a manual mount that has manual slow motion. I haven't found one that's as nice as that.
Yeah. For the form factor, for the weight of it, and what it's able to do, I'm not sure there's a parallel. Like, I don't believe any other mount does what that one can do. Certainly, there are heavier mounts that have all of those features and work exceptionally well. But this is a really nice grab and go mount that can handle a pretty decent sized apochromat. So yeah, it's really, really good. If anybody has an opportunity to purchase one, I would say jump on it, because they don't show up very often, and when they do, they sell pretty quickly. And then it had I don't know if you noticed my tension knob for the altitude. I had like a big plastic knob, and that didn't come with it. It came with this tiny little like set screw with and you could put like a Phillips head screwdriver, and you're like, well, frig. You don't want to be doing that every time you want to change like your altitude tension. And it was really small. And a number of times, like, I took out a heavy eyepiece and it did the nosedive, and, nothing was damaged or whatever, but I was like, this isn't good. But I played around and I found out that one of my Manfrotto knobs, just like the plastic knob, actually fit in this hole.
So
Oh, wow.
that's what I have in the hole. And then my friend Tim, he modified it to fit on that tripod. The tripod is from Rudy Dorner, who started the Dorner Telescope Museum and funded it. And anyhow, so it was modified with the slow motion controls. It was modified to go on this tripod. We did some machining to it, and then it was again modified because I put this plastic set screw in. And so this was all done in really quick order within the first basically couple weeks of getting it. I had it very modified. So originally the Lapidus is called the Lapidus modified because it was one of the ones that Takahashi had taken, dismantled, and reconfigured in this higher carrying capacity mode. And then I took that and made all these further modifications to it because I did all this research before I bought it, and I was just ready to go once I had it. And so 3 weeks after I owned it, the person who had sold it to me had buyer's remorse and contacted me and said, "Hey, look, I really want the mount back, and I'll pay you what you paid for it, or if you want a little extra or whatever." And I said, one, I really love the mount, and I'm not really looking to sell it, and two, I've massively modified it, made all these crazy modifications. There's now some new holes drilled in it, and it has different. And so I sent him a photo of it. I never heard back from the guy. I think he was kind of upset that I'd done all these modifications to it. So, but I think it's for the better. But yeah, look, it's a bit funny looking, but it works awesome.
Yeah, it does perform well.
So the Zeiss Ape. So is this the version 2, the 16 millimeter we were looking through?
No, version 1.
Version 1.
Yeah.
And then the 3.2 Barlow gave us about 5 millimeters for 150. Yeah, we could see those moons. It was fantastic. Really like that eyepiece. The view is really stuck with me. It keeps kind of floating back in and out of my mind. I would like to get it on a great night. And I know what I was going to say about these expensive eyepieces is that the night seemed like it had a bit of like a little bit of scatter around like Jupiter and maybe a couple of the brighter stars, even to the unaided eye. Did you notice that as well?
Yeah. We noted that the transparency just wasn't outstanding either. Like again, the night was an okay night. It was clear,
okay. It was clear,
but it was windy, which kind of impacts your seeing. Yeah. And there was certainly something in the air that was distorting the light a little bit too.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what Alistair was saying about the lake here. So he and I were chatting about the lake before, and he was saying how the lake should affect my conditions more than what I've noticed. And I think it was actually the lake. So what happens with the lake is usually hot or frozen. And we're actually in the transition period. And yesterday morning, I could see kind of like steam coming off the lake as the lake has begun to freeze up. But right in front of me, and I'm sitting here right now about 120 meters away from me is a giant lake that's 93 kilometers long and a few kilometers across at widest. And I think this is the time of year where it's impacting my observing, because typically I come out here for so long and then we shut the place down, and then I come out here once the lake is frozen and the sky clears out. It's just sort of an odd time of year to be observing. Really, we often don't have good conditions when we're in this transition phase.
No, exactly. It can be a little challenging, but we've persevered, and I think the Zeiss Abbey kind of saw through that somehow. Like the scatter control is what really, really impressed me with that eyepiece. I haven't used it a ton since I've gotten it because I'm primarily BinoView and I only have one of them, so it hasn't seen a lot of time in my telescope. But yeah, I was really impressed with how it controlled that. And what would have been kind of fun would have been to go between that and say your 5 millimeter XW when we were looking at Saturn. Yeah, because where I noticed these eyepieces like with high transmission, like these Zeiss Abbey orthos, where they maybe excel is revealing like really faint things like those moons. And I'm just curious, like it was quite obvious to see them in the Zeiss eyepiece. And sometimes when you switch to an eyepiece, not quite as transmissive, you may struggle to see those moons a little bit. Now, that might have been the only difference, if even that. It's who knows, right? Just speculation, but it would have been neat to just compare.
Yeah, I would have liked to do that comparison, and we can. I think we should do that comparison. I think that would be a comparison that people would enjoy reading about, because both those eyepieces and the setup is exceptionally rare. And that Barlow, by the way, is brand new. I just bought it last year or the year before, and it hasn't seen tons of mileage, but I do really like it, and it has the compression ring. So I didn't want to put that eyepiece. Originally, I thought I would get my 2 times Barlow, but see, that's got the set screw without the compression ring. And there was no way I was putting your Abe into that compression ring to get that little scratch. I wasn't going to scratch that eyepiece, so that wasn't happening. But it worked so well at 150 power. But it would be neat to take that in the Barlow and compare it to the 5X XO. I think that'd be really neat. And then I have the 5XW. Do you still have the 5 Nav?
No. Oh yeah. No, sorry. The Nav. I do. Yes.
Yes. So we could running those would be 4 neat eyepieces just to sit and compare. But I think when we do that, we want to be seated and kind of have things set up a little better. And I don't know. I don't know if I would use the 5-inch apochromat on that, because that telescope, although it works very well for the planets, I might prefer to try this experiment on in one of the Takahashi planetary telescopes, just for that sake.
Well, and I think line up a few objects, not just planets, but also line up a few deep sky objects,
double stars,
nebula, some globulars, and some galaxies. And
I could come
across all of them.
I could come up with this pretty quick, and this would be a good time of year to do it too, because we could take a look at the trapezium and in the Orion Nebula. We could take a look at one of the smaller globular clusters. I'm just trying to think, one of the ones up in I think there's one up in Pegasus or Delphinus. There's a smaller one. We could take a look at a few double stars, the planets. But yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. That could be an interesting experiment.
And even, just to add to it, even comparing it at its native focal length, the 16 millimeters, we could run it against
the 17. Yeah, you want to get that photo of the mini and the mighty kind of, because literally the 17 millimeter, I have my it's a 1,000 milliliter or a 32 ounce water bottle here. And full, this is only half full, but if it was full, that's how big and hefty the 17 millimeter Explorer Science 92 degree is, compared to yours, which is more like a thimble.
Yeah. There's not a lot to it, and I could even bring the Leica aspheric zoom. We could make a whole event out of this with all sorts of eyepieces. To play around with.
I think that, to be honest, you seem less nervous about this than I did. I did not like handing you that eyepiece and being handed that eyepiece in over the snow or even anywhere. I was a little bit uncomfortable with that. I would almost want to have the observatory running to do that experiment, just because it felt a little sketchy with all the snow and wind. And I was like, you were fine. I was just I guess because last year I did drop an eyepiece. So
yeah, we should definitely do it at some point here.
Yeah. It was neat to look at we took a look at the Merope Nebula. In the Pleiades. I forget what eyepiece. It might have been my 40 with, I used we looked at it unaided, and then I put the H beta in for fun.
Yeah, and it definitely popped out a little bit. It was neat to have a look at that. Enjoyed it. The just going back to the Helix a little bit too. I couldn't believe just how much detail we were seeing in there, and it was sort of fleeting. It would come and go, but given that we were standing in the night's conditions, it was really impressive. And I was with averted vision, and it would kind of come and go. There's sort of that arc that comes off of the Helix a little bit, and was definitely seeing that from time to time.
Oh yeah,
it was really neat.
Yeah, I thought you made a really neat comment about convincing yourself that you could see it. So what we did is I had my 40 millimeter with an O3 in, and that gives 18 power in the 5-inch. And then when we scanned over it, it was like, knock your socks off, obvious, right? Like there was no way you could miss it in that setup, eh?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like as soon as you put your eye there, like the helix is quite large and it's fairly bright and it just popped. Like there was no mistaking it.
Yeah. And then what I did is I put the 17 millimeter in, no filter. And then I kind of panned around a bit because it wasn't obvious. So, and realize this too, when I put the 17 in, it can cause the telescope to tail dive a little bit. So it will off center whatever you've got there. If you don't have it like locked down like a very, very particular way. And I didn't. And so then Shane, you went and panned it around a bit and kind of put it in a spot and said, I could convince myself or something like that. Like you said something. What was it that you said? Do you remember?
Yeah, like I said, I think I can convince myself that I'm seeing it, which means I'm not sure that I'm really seeing it because who knows? It wasn't super apparent.
Yeah. So then what I did is I locked everything down and put the 40 back in, and it was centered, right? It was neat.
Yeah, it was right there. Yeah.
It was right there. So it was kind of a neat experiment as to when we think like we're very doubtful of ourselves for seeing or not seeing stuff. It was just sort of a neat experiment to run. And then we put the filter on the 17, and it wasn't as obvious as in the 40, but then you could start pulling out some of that detail I think you were referring to.
Yeah. I think my preferred view was with the 40. Backing off the power sometimes will make objects appear brighter because of the exit pupil. And I did prefer that view a lot. Yeah.
I like I said, we had a lot of snow down, and I had eyepieces. I had a handful of eyepieces, but just because I was sort of nervous about messing around too much with all the snow, and it wasn't level, and we're basically it wasn't the ideal conditions. It would have been nice to kind of try a few different powers. Like I should have tried my 32, but I think I had a different filter in, and then it would have been nice to try the 22 as well. I keep thinking it would be nice to find a Nagler 26 at some point in time, and in the far and distant future to try as well. But it was pretty cool. And what else did we look at? We looked at the ring at the end. We looked at the California Nebula, but that's just like, we saw it. Wasn't amazing.
There wasn't a lot there. You need a darker sky for that to be really appreciated, I think. And the ring though was great. The ring was well positioned. It was a little bit into the western sky now for us. And I always love looking at the ring because of how well it takes magnification. And I think my comment was like this view is exactly like it was in my 8-inch Newtonian way back when I had it. And it was really quite beautiful. There was no need for averted vision to see the donut structure. It was quite obvious. And I forget what power we were running on that. Was that the 5 millimeter? I think it might have been. Yeah. So about 150 times.
150, yeah.
Yeah, it really jumped out, and huge. The image scale at that magnification was great. Really, really good view. Like it was already kind of obvious to me anyway that it wasn't a perfect circle. That it's a little, kind of oblong, I guess. And nice view. Really nice view.
Yeah. I think we had, like I said, some of the moisture in there because on better nights, I've done a few sketches of the California from here, and it's like last night I found that night, Friday night, it was like we could scarcely see it. It was definitely not anything to write home about, but I guess it was about a month ago. Yeah, and the binoculars, it was very, very easy to see and quite clear. And then with the telescope, last November I did a sketch of it. It was pretty good. But that night, Friday night, it was just sort of okay conditions between a little bit of stuff in the atmosphere and the wind. Yeah, it just wasn't there. Yeah. So what else in the session? One thing we did, which was kind of cool, is and this took a bit of a while just because of everything going on. the past few months, but we're able to trade off a few things, eh?
Yeah, yeah. So Eric had sent. So Eric is he's been on the show. He helped get an article published about the podcast in Sky News, and we've had lots of correspondence with him. Great guy. He sent some hoodies, or depending where you live, bunny hugs is another term.
But hoodies for the rest of the world.
Hoodies for the rest of the world. Yeah, that's right. And you know what, Chris? I'm actually I always call them hoodies as well. I'm not a bunny hug guy, so I might get kicked out of the province. We'll see.
I don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, he sent that. He sent some stickers in the hoodie. It says Star Seeker on it, and it's from the Calgary RASC Center.
Yeah.
So thanks, Eric. Really appreciate it. It's a great looking hoodie, and the stickers will look great on my eyepiece cases.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then Andrew had sent some. I think those beers are probably long since processed on your end, Shane.
No. I've still got a few. Yeah. But delicious beers from where in Ontario? I forget now.
He's near London. I don't know exactly where near London, Ontario, but he's got the Fork River Brewing Company there. Yeah.
Delicious libations. Quite enjoyed what I've drank so far.
Yeah, you dropped out those ciders, which is really, really appreciated. Those went to your house, and then somebody else, Chris, is sending us something. I'm excited to see what lands in the mail here in coming weeks. Should be kind of neat to see what arrives. But yeah, sometimes it can be few and far between when we get together, just especially this year where, I even kind of drive by the exit to your place on my way out here. But so many times I've been trying to run out here to meet with my builder, because he's been working on the observatory, and that's kind of how it's done. So you gotta, arrange and then meet. That's happening on virtually 90% of the time when I'm driving out here, or then it's like really late or at an awkward time, and it's like, this isn't going to work out. So I'm glad that things finally worked out. But anything to add to that session? Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the rest of my observing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so after you left, I went in and warmed up for about half an hour and left the 5-inch setup, and went back out and pointed it at the North American Nebula, because Cygnus had kind of swung around enough by that point. I've done a few sketches of it over the past couple of years, but then that night I put in the UHC filter and the 32 millimeter Masuyama, which has about an 80-degree field. Gives 3.3 true field in that telescope, just barely enough to squeeze both the North American and the Pelican Nebula into the field of view. You could clearly see that Cygnus wall wrapping around the Pelican Nebula and the dark void between them, one of Lynn's dark nebula 935. And additionally, down below, I could just scarcely detect the Cygnus arc IC 5068, which is just to the south. And yeah, it was kind of neat. I think next time I'm kind of hoping to maybe do another one of these and maybe try to track down some more of, there's like some asterisms and clusters in the region as well. So I think I need a chart to kind of properly suss out all those kind of things. But I was happy with the way the sketch came out. Sort of gives kind of that appearance of these two nebula together.
Yeah, it is an interesting sketch. Good observation.
I also sketched the Vale Nebula. I got the east, west, and Pickering's triangle, but the sketch wasn't that good. I find this is what happens with my sketching is I'll get one sketch and it comes out really well, really fast, like that sketch of the North American. That's like, while I was observing it for maybe half an hour, and that probably is representative of maybe like only 15 or 20 minutes of work. And then I go over to the Vale Nebula and I just can't get it. I just can't get the sketch down of it the way I want. But yeah, it seems like the nature of the sketching.
Yeah. Not that I know anything about it, but I'll take your word.
Just give it a try. I gave you all those pencils that time. You should.
Oh yeah. I forgot. I should probably return those, because truth be told, I likely won't get too deep into that.
Anyway, so I packed it in around midnight and went to bed for 4 hours and got up at I guess about 4:30. I got 4 hours sleep and woke up at 4:30 and slowly got ready and went out. It was actually windier at 4:30 in the morning.
Okay.
It was still just -4, and I took a quick look at M42 and M93 and maybe a couple other things, like very, very quick, because I wanted to look at the Seagull Nebula there, which is on the Canis Major Monoceros border, although I think the main part of it up is in Monoceros. This is pretty faint. This is one of those challenge objects. Not sure if you're familiar with this one, Shane.
No, I'm not.
But it's one of those large, wide field targets, but it's pretty faint. And then there's also some confusion about it. It's a bit of an enigmatic target because some of the catalog numbers have been confused. There's basically a bright nebula, or a brightish nebula, which represents the seagull's head, and then the wingspan runs north-south. And the seagull's head looks like it's sort of turning back to look over the north wing. And then there's some other associated and not associated nebula and clusters in this sort of 3-degree north-south stretch. I guess it's about a degree or so wide, and about almost 3 degrees long, or 3 degrees long once you factor everything in. It's one of those ones that kind of jumps out on the star charts, but unfortunately, every time I've gone to take a look at it in the past, it's sort of like, at the end of the observing session, once this region of sky is nice and high, you're just, it's really cold and you're burnt out from observing. And I've never even remotely seen anything in this region of sky. But there on Saturday morning, I had my star chart all picked out and ready to go, and kind of knew where the field was. And so I quickly star hopped there. I had the H beta still in the 40 millimeter from when we were looking at the California Nebula the night before. And I noticed that in the Interstellarum chart, you know how it notes which filters should work well with which nebula?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Said that the H beta should work well for the head of the seagull, and that's Vandenberg 93. And then it said it sort of has like the H for H beta in the circle that depicts the outline of the nebula. And then for the wingspan, which runs north-south, it had an O in that, which represents the O3, saying that an O3 filter should work well for that. I didn't find that to be the case. As I swept over, I could clearly see like the outline of the nebula, and I thought, oh, well, that's cool, because if it's showing up that well in H beta, I wonder what it looks like without the filter. So I took the filter out. I could scarcely convince myself, kind of like when you were talking about the helix before, I could like kind of convince myself maybe I was kind of sort of seeing something there, but not really. Put the O3 filter in. The nebula was about the same as no filter view, but there's a nebula at the southern extreme called Cedarland 90, and that one just boom, like it just like someone threw a light switch on, and it was so bright and distracting. I wasn't even sure if it was part of this association or not, and I actually started sketching there because I was like, well, regardless of the seagull, this is an interesting target. It looks like something. So I started my sketch there, and then sketched from the south to the north. So with the O3 filter, that one really jumped out. And then I put I took that filter out, made an observation, and drew in the stars without the filters, and drew in several clusters. There's a cluster to the south east, NGC 2345, and then there's a cluster on the sort of the middle eastern section, which is 2343, and then opposite that is the head of the seagull, which is Sharpless 2- or it's the Vandenberg 93, not to confuse chart numbers. And then I could see in and around that brighter H beta head, you could actually see these tendrils of sort of a mix of star clouds and nebula. Some of them are star clouds and some of them are nebula, but like I said, I didn't really do a lot of research or look at too many images before, and then kind of had sketched them in. And then my sketch wasn't great because it was sort of compressed because I ran out of room on the page. So I kind of had sort of bent it in a funny way. And so I had to redo it yesterday because it was sort of a rare observation of this. So then looking at photos, especially hydrogen alpha photos, I could see these sort of faint fingers coming up, and you could see that some of them aren't nebula, but what they are is just star clouds. So yeah, that was kind of a neat observation to make, sort of something I always wanted to do, and a great target for really low power wide fields. It's in Sue French's Deep Sky Wonders hardcover book. She talks about seeing it with her 105 millimeter at 17 power. So if she's seeing it at that, I don't know what her skies were like. I think her skies are kind of similar to what I have here. And so with a 5-inch operating at essentially the same power, I think I'm able to get maybe a little bit more of the nebula.
Yeah, interesting.
Last night I went out with the binoculars and saw. I tried to see it. I could kind of convince myself I could see it, but I took a look at the Orion Nebula. I took a look at Messier 78. Took a look at the Beehive M44 and M67, and just kind of panned around quite a bit. It was just a windy but very warm middle of the night session for this time of year, positive 3 degrees, but like I said, really, really windy. And it was just kind of nice. Took a look at M93 and basically just like a 20-minute session or so, and then went back to bed. But yeah, so I got a few sessions in like about a 36-hour period of time or something like that, or less.
Yeah, right on.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Anything else to add sort of to this observation show?
Nope, that is all, sir.
All right. Well, dear listeners, please subscribe, do us a favor, and share the show with other stargazers you know. Thanks for listening. You can send us your show ideas, your own observations, like we just shared today, and any questions you might have about observational or amateur astronomy to actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.